A massive good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining me for the first of a series of 30-minute business entrepreneur sessions. Today's session is on the topic of organisational structures, very often a foundational thing that people don't give enough thought to, that later on kind of comes along to trip them up. Under this Zoom webinar, you've got the ability to pose questions in the Q&A box and just an open chat in the chat box. You're very welcome to post stuff in there as we go. I'll either answer them as we go along, or I'll make sure that I've covered them off at the end of the webinar. And of course, if you've got any questions that you can't really pose on here, I'm always open to you, usual channels. So I say thank you very much for joining us. Let's kick off. This is a 30-minute session, and I'm going to do my best to make sure I bring it in within the 30 minutes. So it's going to split into two sections. The first section of today's webinar is about the difference between managing and leading, and the constituent parts of a functional organisational chart and how that should serve you in your business. And the second part is a shorter section on KPIs versus KAIs, key performance indicators versus key activity indicators, and an accountability chart. Accountability chart may be new to some people on this call, but you'll understand a little bit more about why that exists as we go through part two. So without further ado, let's move to part one. So managing versus leading. I certainly started my career as a manager and ended my career in business as a leader. Leadership is easier once you understand what it is you're meant to be doing. So I guess it was summarized to me as that leadership focuses on doing the right thing, where management is about doing things right. So doing things right can sometimes mean that that kind of process and control takes over from the kind of touchy-feely logic of how's that going to land, how are my people going to deal with it, is it going to give me the best outcome? As we move from managing to leading, we have to stop thinking top down. We have to stop thinking about shouting at the people who report to us, and more about how we support them to be able to drive them up. So we're thinking kind of from the bottom of the organisation up rather than the top down. And very much an organisational structure is about having a published organisational chart is about helping everybody see who they can look up to, who is there to make sure they become the best version of themselves. So if you've got a structure that doesn't provide that, then you end up with people who kind of assume things, and their assumptions are generally not as you would want. They're often misaligned to where you're trying to take the business. So why don't people create organisational structures? Why don't they produce a drawing and communicate it? It's often that it leads to awkward conversations because people in your team have assumed a role and you've allowed that to happen. And so when you want to say, well, actually, no, you report to this person, you don't report to me, that becomes an awkward conversation that you need to have. You need to prepare for it. There's a thought that by documenting stuff, you lose some of your ability to change. What I mean by that is with an undocumented system, you have this idea that you've got this big flow of people that you can put in any area of the business you need them to work. But that ambiguity isn't necessarily what will drive the best outcome for all of those people or your business. And sometimes it's complicated. You've got people who work for various different people in different roles, and you don't really know how to start to draw this out, let alone whether it's going to serve your business by doing so. But why you should do it, why you should give some thought to coming out with an organisational chart is it's easier for new employees to join your firm and become kind of active within your company. It's easier for you to create standard operating procedures that will help teach new people when they join and will help you drive a consistent way of being able to do work. And it should form part of your disaster recovery plan. If you're thinking about a business that would work if somebody disappeared, if somebody was off work because they're sick, and let's face it, lots of are having to deal with people who are off with COVID or just being pinged because they might have it. having a organisational structure that drives a disaster recovery plan is a positive thing. How many people can a manager manage? The answer is probably hundreds. I mean, if you look at that list of skills up there for a manager, you can just bully people into doing stuff. So you can probably manage hundreds of people, but in argument to how many people can you lead, I would say probably, well, 10 or less. So when you start thinking about your organisational structure, you kind of want to think about not having loads of direct reports. Unless they're all doing a very similar mundane thing, it's very difficult to lead personally and effectively and authentically with a lot of people. So that gives you a bit of an overview of the difference between managing and leading. I'm going to introduce you to Bob. Now, Bob runs a successful business, but it's kind of stifling itself. Bob's in the middle. He's in the middle of everything. Everything comes across his desk. He ultimately has control, and he ultimately will say what's happening or not happening. Bob's behaviour is probably the issue that's driving everything to come across his desk, but it's not what Bob wants. Bob thinks his organisation looks a bit like this. So kind of the same people, but there's a structure to it. He thinks he has 3 people in his leadership team, but all of those people underneath those leaders are all reporting directly to Bob. I say he's in that controlling seat, but he doesn't want it. Really, he wants Sam, Mark and Val to step up and take some responsibility. When we look at Sue here, Sue is Mark's right-hand arm, is kind of PA, assistant, catch-all. Sue's amazing. But Sue is also, unfortunately, being stretched because she's also doing work for Sam and Val. So there's a kind of dotted line that means that Sue has kind of ended up working for 3 people. So although in theory she reports to Mark, she's also being called upon by Sue and Val, and all the while kind of thinks that Bob's her boss. So the problem for that is the confusion that reigns in Sue's life leaves her with a job that she really wished she kind of didn't have. So what we're going to do now is take 2 steps back. And so the thing about taking 2 steps back is I want you to think about the logical way that you set out your organisational chart. So I like to think of it as a kind of getting work, doing work and getting paid for it. So you've got somebody at the top, the big cheese, the managing director, the chief exec, some exalted title that they want to call themselves. And they're in charge of strategy and vision. They're in charge of making sure the business is going to remain relevant for the future. You've then got getting work, so that encompasses marketing and sales and making sure you've got enough business coming in. You've got doing work, making sure that whatever it is you do it brilliantly. The buying and selling maybe of the things you do, the customer touching piece of what you do. And then lastly, you've got that payroll piece, the collecting money off customers, the paying the suppliers, the making sure that kind of all that compliance stuff is done in the getting paid bit. If you have too many people reporting to the managing director, if you have too many people at this layer, it tends to stifle growth because again, everything is going to end up being in the managing director's basket. It reduces a development opportunity for people if you've got too many people there. And frankly, it's less valuable when the business needs to exit, when the owners need to exit, because they're so intrinsically involved in everything that goes on in the business. So taking that model and then widening it out a little bit to give you more roles. So again, we've got the getting work, doing work, getting paid for it. There might be other functional roles underneath. So if we think back to Bob's business and how Sue was stretched, that kind of admin function probably exists in all 3 roles. She probably would be working for all 3. And if the business was bigger, it would justify having 3 people in that role. And right now they can only afford 1. But wouldn't it be nice if there was clarity of what happens in each of those roles? So as at the point they're big enough, they can go, right, okay, well, we need another Sue. Let's go and put her in the sales manager's admin role. What does that role look like? So get all those big roles in. So as actually you've got some clarity of the kind of structure of the business. What we're talking about next is about delegating authority. So the thing about delegating authority, it starts with defining authority. So when you look at the managing director empowering the sales manager, what does he have permission to do? What can the managing director say to the sales manager about what they're allowed to do. The sales manager, she might be able to sign up a customer that's kind of 30 seats. But if it's more than that, if it's more than a certain size of customer, they might need to then come back and speak to the managing director and say, can I sign this up? So there's a kind of an understanding of the boundaries within which they can make autonomous decisions. They can make decisions without needing to refer to the managing director. The amount of authority you give your direct reports should be based on their ability to handle that authority. So poor leadership says you can have all the authority. Good leadership is where you gently give them authority as they're able to prove that they can make good decisions, that their autonomy, their ability to make decisions without coming back to you, is actually always within the boundary you've given them, and they're good decisions. I mean, another good example might be expenses. You know, if you have people who travel on the road, you might say, well, okay, you can spend £50 for a bed and breakfast. So that's the level of authority that you're given. So anybody who stays away from work can spend up to £50 for a night for a bed and breakfast. But that's the level of their authority. Underneath that, pick whichever hotel you want. But if they want to spend £100 for a room because it's nearer where they're going, or there's some convenience, or it's only one that's available, maybe that's when they need to come back and ask their boss for additional authority. So if we don't get this bit fixed, Bob ends up in the middle again. If Bob wants to know every pound that's spent, if Bob wants to know every decision that's made, every customer that gets signed up, everything's going to come across Bob's desk. So it's important that we define a safety net of authority. If Bob is overriding decisions, it's only a matter of time before he breaks every one of his line managers. Every one of his leaders will struggle to deal with the fact that they are kind of benign. They can't make any decisions without them coming back to Bob. And frankly, what's the point in having a leadership team if you're not going to get them to make decisions? Where the magic happens is where this gets cascaded through the organization. So all those other people, all the kind of admin, marketing, new business sales people underneath the sales manager will get their own level of authority underneath the sales manager's authority. So but that kind of gives you an overview of why you would do it like this. I want to show you something that existed from my old business, which I exited a few years ago, and I'm sure they've changed it since. But this is kind of taking from the drawing that you just saw, a kind of getting work, doing work, getting paid for it model, and now has some major functions under each of those roles. So for example, the account managers, you can see, have quarterly reviews, and they need to identify customer requirements and prepare proposals and present proposals and handle pre-sales. 5 big things that if account managers are doing those things, the account managers will be doing their job properly. They're grouped to be relevant. So you put the kind of tasks that need the same kind of person and are aligned to that piece of the business together. So if, say, for example, you've got somebody doing admin, they're probably not going to be great at telesales. They would be 2 separate roles. You wouldn't put somebody who's good at doing the paperwork in the back end, but probably highly introverted, into a job where you expect them to be making 100 phone calls a day. There'd be different roles. So think about that as you define this out. And it's okay to have lots more boxes than you have people today, because what you're doing is you're defining your perfect structure to grow into. Don't add the names of the people you've got at the moment until you've got this flashed out. It will influence you because you'll start thinking, what can Sue do? And I don't want you to think, what can Sue do? I want you to think what you need to make your business as successful as possible. So leave your list of players on one side until you've worked out your format as to how you're going to be setting your business out that you think will work functionally. No dotted lines. Create an extra box for everywhere you wanted to put a dotted line, because ultimately they'll end up being in those areas of the business. So moving on from there, once you've got that defined, each of those things in those boxes, you can create standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures can be a flowchart like this. So this could be, with a beginning and an end. I've just given you a little excerpt of it, where things come in from outside or where they go out and what people are expected to do. It could just be a paragraph, a little pen picture of what you expect somebody to do. Earlier on, we were talking about kind of quarterly reviews under account management. Well, what does that look like? Well, so I'm going to prepare some information to take to the customer. I'm going to make an appointment to see the customer. I'm going to go and review it with the customer, and I'm then going to deal with any outcome from that meeting, right? So that might be what's expected of it. There might be a few more words to it. The advantage of having this in place is it kind of helps when it comes to doing things like bringing new staff on, because you've kind of got a structure as to what goes in there. So create one of these for each of the big functions. When we worked through this a good number of years ago, we found something very successful, which was we used a brand new starter for the company to document them across the whole business. We set the first one up and said, this is what a standard operating procedure looks like, and then allowed this lady to go and sit with everybody who does a job today and document what they do, knock it up into a flow chart, put it in front of the member of staff who does it and says, do I understand this correctly? Is this what you do? And they would say, well, yeah, maybe not that bit. Yes, I do that bit. And end up with something they agree is the job they do today. Yes, the new starter now knows everything about the business, but also it was a way of getting it done without it burdening too many people. But it then meant there's this library of standard operating procedures. When somebody new steps into a role that exists, or if you restructure a job and say, these functions are going over there, you can hand them the pieces of paper and go, here's kind of what's expected of you in this role. So standard operating procedures, keep them simple, but actually, and keep them in a format that works for you and your team. I say it could be pretty pictures like we did, or it could be a nice little paragraph. But get that together, and that's going to help drive the adoption of that for new employees, etc. And it keeps things standard. That's the other thing about standard operating procedures, is it stops members of staff from wandering off doing their own thing. So back to this drawing, and so now we can put the people in. We've got a list of people, we're going to put their names in, and we're going to work out what we're short. So we'll have some jobs that we don't have people for. Now today, those jobs are happening because they're being covered by somebody else. And that might be how you have to continue until you're able to either recruit or become big enough that you can afford to recruit the additional people to go into those roles. And that's okay. You may also have some people who don't fit anywhere. So you then need to decide whether or not you can cross-train them into the roles that you need, whether they would take those jobs, or whether ultimately you're going to need to change some of your players to get the ultimate team that's going to deliver your business success. Assign understudies for each of the roles. So if you say, for example, in this model, the sales director, when the sales director is on leave, on sick, you don't want the managing director stepping in to be the sales director. You need somebody from the teams underneath to be stepping up to cover that role. So think about how you get people to act up into roles rather than how everybody steps down. The problem with stepping down is the business slows down whilst people are out of those seats. Whereas if you can get people to step up, you're building disaster recovery, you're building future leaders, and it will build upon your success. So once you've got there, you need to communicate it with the team. I would suggest that you've probably spoken to the team in the run up to this and got them to help you define the roles that are in there anyway, all those functions. So it shouldn't be a surprise to them, but make sure it's communicated in a clean, safe way. This is a communication tool. People then know where they stand and they know what's expected of them. So that brings us to the end of part one. And we're now going to move to part two. And part two is shorter, so I will stick within my 30 minutes. KPIs versus KAIs. Lots of people talk about KPIs and it's thrown away like it doesn't matter. But KAIs are not as often spoken about. So I want to introduce you to those and a couple more terms. So KAIs are activities. They're the things you do. The KPI is the outcome of the thing that you do. So one is the input and one is the output, really. So you're measuring the activities and then you're going to measure how well they worked. The other two terms I'm introducing to you here is management information and strategic information. Management information is typically a roll-up of KPIs. If you've got 10 people in your organization all doing the same job, then at a management level, you're probably interested in the aggregated data. So KAIs and KPIs are very often individual. Once you get to a management level, it's normally in aggregate. Are we delivering enough hours? Are we selling enough things? Is probably a KMI. At the strategic level, KSIs, depending on who you are, the strategic things include things like, are we growing? Are we profitable? And they'll be rooted in things like, are we churning customers or are we churning employees? So often they're kind of very top level metrics, and assuming those numbers are being met, that at that level, you don't need to worry yourself about the detail, because you know that all of your leadership team below are doing the right thing. If all of a sudden your customer satisfaction disappears, you're churning customers, you're churning employees because they're not happy at work, then I would suggest you need to start looking further down in that key information pyramid and to find out what's kind of gone amiss. So to give you an example, KAI, you might expect people to make 100 widgets. A KPI would be that you want them to make 100 widgets in a day, because this is now a measurable figure, and you want greater than 99% of them to make it through your quality control. So now we've got a proper performance measure that's got numbers against it, yet actually for the member of staff, they kind of know they need to be making 100 widgets. That's kind of how the thing works. And then if at a management level, if you've got 10 people, maybe you need 1,000 widgets made a day, and you might still have the same 99% quality pass rate. And at the strategic level, they're interested in quality. How many remakes have we got of widgets? Are we getting paid for our widgets? Are we getting the right money for our widgets? Is our customer satisfied or employee satisfied? What should you reward, individual or team? Well, that's interesting. I would say both. I think there's some advantages of people getting a reward for the work that they do, but actually you probably need to reward the team. Now, the reason why you do that is that numbers drive behavior. And if you only reward people for their own actions, they don't work as well as a team. If you only reward people as a team, they hide behind the team. So if you can introduce something that rewards both, you'll encourage the best of behaviors. You tend to get the behaviors you deserve with measuring numbers. So measure the wrong things at your peril. And what I would say is you don't need to reward everything. You need to reward the things that are easy to calculate. You can measure lots of stuff, just don't make them all rewardable. You need to kind of reward the things that you know are going to drive the business. So moving on, the next piece I promised you was the activity chart. So this was a game changer, and this was one of the things that I did towards the end of my working career in my business, was to define everything people do as activities and explain them under these 6 headings. So the first one, the activity, what they're going to do, a nice catchy title, a descriptive title for the activity. The second one, the why. And people talk about why. Why would you do it? Why are you better off for it? So this is a short paragraph explaining why the activity needs to be done. We then get to the third one, the key activity indicators. Remember, these are inputs. So what the employee needs to do to deliver this activity. There could be numbers in there, but typically you don't need them. It's a kind of nice, this is kind of what we're expecting you to be doing. We then got the key performance indicator. This is numbers. So this is the output. What will it look like? If I'm doing well, what will it look like? So as an employee can look at their activity and go, there's an expectation that I'm going to be able to do 10 widgets, right? And at a good quality, and they're all going to make it through quality control. Well, that's my KPI. What good looks like, again, this is a paragraph. So if you're doing it, what would the feeling be? So think feelings. So how will you feel? How will the business feel? What will it look like to the outside if you've got this right? I'll give you an example in a minute, and that will make more sense. And then the last bit there is the call for help. So this is about reminding people under every activity they're a member of a team. So what could your colleagues do to help you? So if you get everybody in the company to read the whole activity chart, they will understand what they can do to help their fellow man, to help the team succeed, and ultimately to help the business succeed, which is kind of important for their career, their job, and a long-term engagement. So this is an example of an activity chart. So all six there. So let's say this is like a sales thing, a new business. So signing up the right new customers is the activity. So the key there is right new customers. Why? Well, without 10% growth per year, the rest of the business growth and benefits and pay rises won't deliver. Okay, that makes sense. Key activity. So here's some numbers describing the funnel. We want 10 inquiries at the top and 1 customer at the bottom. We've then got key performance indicators. Well, this is an IT business, so they're thinking, well, we need 25 more end users to start having support with us every month for the year. So, and that's in excess of any that have gone. So there's a clarity there. We'll know if we're doing the right thing. So what good looks like? Well, if we're signing up the right customers that are aligned to our values, they're likely to buy deep into our product stack because they're going to understand how we're trying to help them. So call for help. Well, anybody in the firm can identify a new opportunity. They can talk to existing customers about referrals. And so maybe that's the thing you want to call out. So if you repeat that process and write those 6 statements for each of the processes in your organization, that would kind of drive your behavior. Everybody gains clarity of what it is they need. And as I said, you don't need to reward everything that you've got here. You just need to reward the ones that will drive the behaviors you want in your organization. Praise the good things so as you get more of them. What am I covered? That's probably about that. So yeah, here's the shameless plug for my book. Everything I've spoken to you about today comes from my book. It's available on Amazon, and if you've already got a copy, read it. It'll be really useful for you. And drift back onto Amazon and write me a 5-star review if that's not too presumptuous. So just closing off, this is a series of 5, so this is the first one today. Thank you for joining. I've got another 4 coming up monthly: September, October, November, December. I will drop the link out to you so you can get booked onto any or all of these as relevant. And once I get to the end of this year, I'll work out if this is ticking the boxes for you guys. I'll work out some more that I can do next year. So once again, thank you very much for joining me today. Did I mention the book? And I will leave you to it. Have an amazing rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the summer holiday. Cheers. Bye-bye.